Back to my YouTube channel. This is Moshix, and I've been meaning to post some new videos for a while, and in fact some people have reached out to me, when is your next video coming out? And I've worked on a couple of videos in the past. I'm working on a very interesting project related to our IBM MVS stuff that we've been looking at for the last couple of months, and that's going to come out, I guess, in September or so. I've also been very busy with some stuff, as well as I've been traveling very extensively the last 6 weeks. So, but here we are today, and this video is about a question that I've been asked quite a number of times over the last couple of months, and that is, an example of question that I received is, could you post a video on how to do this in ZOS, or could you show me how to accomplish this in OS 390, or can you show me how to attach an additional disk to ZOS on Hercules, or how to make OS 390 run on top of my Hercules? And so I've received dozens of this kind of questions, and my answer has always been, sorry, I'm just not interested in ZOS. And people come back and say, well, but it's much newer than MVS. And I say, yes, that's true. But I'm just not going to do any videos on ZOS or any 31-bit IBM mainframe software. And in this video, we're going to look at why. And so the question here is MVS 3.8, our beloved TK4 environment, versus newer style operating systems. And so the question really is, why are we running mainframe operating systems on an emulated environment? I mean, on a Hercules emulator. Why are we doing this? And so I can only talk for myself and my motivation to produce these videos. And obviously, number one is learning more, and I try to always continue learning new things. And while I had a lot of exposure to mainframes in the 80s, I really didn't do much at all from, I guess, like around 89 or so until 2014. I never touched the mainframe again, never saw a TSO logo on the screen again for all those years. And when I got back to it, I just, the main reason for me really to look into MVS is the following. Back then, when I was working with MVS, starting from about 83 or so, I was in the military, and in the military you have obviously a rigid management structure and information structure, and I was very eager to learn more. And we were doing PL1 programming on the DL1 database system, and I was just an application programmer, and I wanted to know more about JES2, I wanted to know more about MVS, I wanted to know more about control structures, I wanted to learn assembler. And anytime I went to the system programmers, I said, could I have a JES2 manual? They asked me, why do you need it for? What do you need that for? And I said, well, just for learning. And they said, well, then you don't need it. And back then in the 80s, and this is a little, that's very much part of the mainframe mindset and the mainframe mentality in the community, is that system programmers do the fun stuff. Application programmers don't need to know anything other than just their compiler and their databases and maybe a little bit of vSAM, and it's all on a need-to-know base. And that always bothered me, because obviously in the Unix world nowadays, in Linux world, asking questions is a good thing, and learning new things is a good thing, and we want people to know as much as possible. And still today, when you read the IBM mailing list, there's still some of that. Why do you need to do this, and why do you need to know? I still see that attitude sometimes, and that's always bothered me a lot. And so when I was able to run TK4 on my own computer at home or on the laptop, I just wanted to learn more, and I wanted to study those things I was never allowed to study. And now, back then, if you needed a manual in the 80s about JES2 or MVS control blocks, you had to go ask assistant programmers, and they didn't give you the manual. There was no way for you to learn that stuff. And now all the manuals are online, which is great, and IBM certainly improved there. And also back there was no internet, obviously, but now we can read all those manuals, and we can not only read the current manuals, we can also find most manuals for software going back to the 60s and 50s online at BitSavers. So we have a lot more information, and we can actually learn that stuff. And so for me, there's no interest in learning ZOS because I'm not really a programmer on ZOS. I mean, I don't do any work on the mainframe for work. I only run mainframe operating systems because I want to learn. And so obviously for learning, you don't need a ZOS environment. All you need is MVS. Also, I run MVS because I want to develop software in mostly PL1 and assembler, maybe a little bit of COBOL, starting to learn some COBOL again. And you will see why TK4 is actually a much better environment for developing software than those ZOS images that people sometimes download. Mostly boils down to there's just way more compilers on TK4, way more programming languages than you would find on ZOS. I think ZOS only has COBOL support. I don't think, obviously you have all the other languages, but in those download images that people download and then run illegally, I think there's only a COBOL compiler and there's no PL1 compiler, although I think there is a high-level assembler probably shipped with ZOS. But we'll look into compiler support in a second. And then the other reason is that I'm not really doing this for running any production workload. I'm doing this for fun. I like learning, I like studying, I like to see how things work on the mainframe. It's just a totally different environment than Unix or Linux, and so for me it's way more. I can do all that with MVS, and probably more than I could with ZOS, and we'll get into that also in a second. And then nostalgia. For me, it's just fun to run the same operating system I was running 35 years ago. I just like it, and so those are on a high level the three reasons. Now, when we come to learning, MVS 3.8 is a much simpler environment, but you still have all the basic structure of ZOS when it comes to the nucleus, how address space is organized, paging, demand paging, swapping, disk access, TSO, all that is already in MVS 3.8. And one thing that I realized is that very little has actually changed. Very few people realize that, for instance, COBOL on the latest COBOL compiler and PL1 compiler for ZOS, they don't even have 64-bit support yet. It's all still 31-bit. And so, yes, those compilers obviously are way more advanced than the compiler we have from the 60s or 70s, but everything that's in ZOS is also in MVS 3.8. And you can learn probably 90% of the stuff that you would find in ZOS, with maybe the exception of RecF and some of the stuff on the storage area. But all the central stuff that is fun to learn, because nobody can tell you that RecF is a fun environment to learn. RecF is a mess, and people despise it, and it is effective. It does good protection, but it's a mess to learn. And so you can learn everything that's central to ZOS by just running MVS 3.8. Almost all the subsystems of ZOS also exist in MVS 3.8. We have VTAM. Obviously, these are earlier versions. There's, for instance, in VTAM, in the communication server, there's no TCP/IP support, even though we have TCP/IP support, but in a different way. We have TSO, which is not TSO enhanced, but still. We have VSAM, which is still only 24-bit. We have a very good assembler, by the way, and the assembler on TK4 is able to do many of the advanced Z390 instructions that existed on machines that were produced much later than when the assembler XF was written. All the control blocks, all the main control blocks are still exactly the same. You still have a CVT table, you still have the TSBs and the SRBs. All those control blocks are still there, and so you can do anything that you would do on a ZOS when you need to access operating system information is still exactly the same on MVS 3.8. And then finally, or semi-finally, way more elegant than ZOS. By this second to last point, what I mean is that, in my opinion, the operating system elegance, and I think when we talk about elegance, we mean that things are coherent, there's an orthogonality to the structuring of the operating system. All those things reached a peak with probably MVS XA. What I mean is that the next version after MVS 3.8, which was called MVS XA, the first 31-bit operating system with a hugely revamped I/O support, so you could have multipath, and the I/O results didn't have to come back on the same channel that on which it started, and of course also 31-bit address spaces. All those, the elegance of the operating system reached a peak with MVS XA. What I saw is that all the subsequent versions of MVS ESA, and then OS 390 and ZOS started to add new features, but they were very clearly, when you look at how they're implemented, they're bolted on in a weird way, and they have to go, and IBM added stuff, having to make everything be compatible with the past. They had to add all these new features in a strange way, and OS 390 and then later on ZOS became a mess. Things are connected in a very weird way, and which sometimes makes me scratch my head on how they ever got this far. And obviously being compatible with everything in the past has a lot to do with it, and which Linux obviously and Windows don't necessarily have to deal with. But it does affect the elegance of ZOS, and so I'm not really interested in understanding all the bolt-on stuff that was added to ZOS. Finally, we have, if you want to learn the mainframe, you can't get around programming on the mainframe, and so the programming languages support is vastly superior on MVS 3.8 than it is on ZOS, and we'll get into that in a second. So when you want to develop software for the mainframe, we see that in TK4 we have COBOL support, we have the amazing PL1F support, a very good compiler. We have assembler XF with added future instructions added on top of it. We have Pascal, we have PL360, which is a mixture of high-level language and assembler. I love that language. We have several Fortran compilers, HG and Wat4. We have Algol, which is kind of the mother of PL1, and PL1 begat BCPL and B, and then later C. Simula, a great, very intellectually stimulating programming language. And then we have the Assist assembler, which is the best way to learn assembler for the 370 architecture. So all that is in TK4, and I guess those could be made to work on ZOS. There's no reason why these compilers wouldn't work on ZOS, but how to move them there and how to get them to run, I don't really know. Then we have the main subsystems, VSAM, QSAM are fully supported, so we can access VSAM from COBOL and PL1 and assembler if you use Jay Mosley's binding, so that works. Finally, MVS 3.8 runs very, very fast on x86 hardware. I'm not sure how fast ZOS would run on x86 hardware because there's so much more code path for Hercules to execute to run a ZOS environment than you would have with MVS 3.8. So you need a smaller machine, or you can run things much faster with MVS 3.8. There's fewer restrictions than in ZOS. ZOS obviously has very advanced storage management and automation, and that automation and workload management sometimes is just a hindrance, I think, versus in MVS 3.8 everything is wide open. You control the machine, and you don't have to deal with system maintenance as much. And then because of the automation we have in MVS 3.8 with I can never say his name, Bandke's BSP automator, you can just start and TK4 and never have to worry about it again. It will keep on running for months, and I have been running it for months without ever shutting down. There are some shortcomings on MVS 3.8, stuff that we don't have necessarily, that we would have on ZOS. I think SDSF, the spooling, viewing, and printing facility of ZOS is just so much better than anything we have in MVS. Yes, I think Greg Price's RFE 3.8 option is great and it works nice, and then the Q spool monitor and viewer also works okay, but it's nowhere near SDSF, and I think that's a problem. Although, however, printing stuff onto real paper has become so difficult on ZOS. Getting stuff out and printed on a PDF has become really complicated on ZOS nowadays on real mainframes. I think running MVS 3.8 makes it much easier to print stuff. So you can look at output, I think in the end, just about as easy as you could with the SDSF, but the elegance of SDSF is something that I miss. And we had the SDSF already back in the 80s. Also ZOS, when you want to develop software, it has a very good dump analysis tool built in, which we don't have in 3.8. I've been playing with the idea of writing a dump analysis tool for MVS 3.8. By the way, the dump format changed from MVS 3.8 to, I guess, OS 390 and ZOS. Dump formats have changed quite a bit, but I will also have a video in the future about this whole topic of dump analysis. I miss a more modern sort utility, but somebody is writing a completely new sort, and as far as I know, Jürgen is going to put it in TK4 update 9, which I hope was originally scheduled to come out in March, but I think now is only coming out hopefully in September of this year in 2017. And then finally, I think the RFE productivity environment and development environment for TK4 is, in my eyes, actually better than ISPF. I think the dataset list utility on ISPF, option 3.4, is probably slightly better than RFE's 3.4, but RFE is just amazing. The editor, I think, is better than ISPF's editor, and that's all I need. Then, running production workload. If you want to run any production workload, I think with TK4, given that it's much slimmer and much more agile, I think we can have, I can imagine 40, 50, 60, 100 TSL developers working just fine on x86 hardware, versus with ZOS, I'm not sure, given how heavy it is, that we could get quite as many developers working. I myself, I used about a year and a half ago TK4 with MVS 3.8. I was teaching in production, I was teaching C development to some unemployed people, and just as voluntary work, as just trying to help out the community in our community center, and they would get credits by attending those classes. And instead of giving each one of them a Linux machine, which then you have to make sure everything's in the right place, it was just much simpler for me to give them a TSO account. I could very easily give them their own environment and check very easily how well they were progressing during class with their own C programming. And people loved it. They got the certifications, they got the credits, and I had 15 people programming at the same time, and that was on Linux inside a virtual machine on top of a very old HP server. I guess I could have just used a normal PC just the same, and the machine never broke a sweat. So it's much easier. That's one more good reason. Finally, and I think this could be the showbreaker anyway, if all the above reasons didn't apply, we can legally run MVS 3.8 on top of Hercules. IBM gave us permission to do so. The license agreement for ZOS, which you have to accept when you want to run ZOS of any version, as far as I know, only allows you to run that operating system on top of IBM processors, IBM computers. And it explicitly does not allow to run it on emulators other than emulators licensed by IBM. IBM has an emulator called ZPDT, and which you have to pay for, and it's quite expensive. So there's really no way to run ZOS without breaking license agreement, which of course kind of invites a legal trouble with IBM and incurring potentially high cost in litigation and paying back licensing cost to IBM. So this is really just the only, and that's all we have, and that's what we have to use, and it's a better environment anyway in my eyes. So I'm not going to bother with ZOS, and so I'm not putting this out in a negative way. I know a lot of people, running ZOS one way or another. I'm not interested, and I'm not going to produce any videos on that. But you all could do whatever you want, and I want to know more about MVS. Anyway, this is all for today. No real logon screens and no access to TSO today. This is all I wanted to say, and I'll be coming back with more videos in the near future. Thank you all, and please subscribe to my video if you like this video, and have a great day. Goodbye.